So let's start off. The movie is called Formosa Betrayed, and you have an active part in the movie. I mean, you not only star in the movie, you helped write it and produce it. Is that correct?
Yes, you could say that.
Okay, good enough. Give me like your pitch.
Absolutely.
Tell me what the movie's about for starters.
Sure. So the movie's about an FBI detective, played by James Vanderbeek of Dawson's Creek fame,
Of course.
who is investigating the murder of an Asian professor at a small Midwestern school. It turns out this professor is being spied upon by his students, and those students are being hired by the government of Taiwan. Through a series of events, he chases the killers to Taiwan, and he finds out that the killers are Chinese mafia hired by the government to kill political dissidents here in the United States. That it goes to the top of the government in Taiwan, and that the U.S. government knows about this but doesn't want to do anything because of the US-Taiwan-China relationship. It's based on actual events. All the characters are composites of at least 2 or more real people, and all the events are composites of actual events that took place during that period, the late 70s and early 80s.
Okay, so now can you talk to us about it? Because apparently this is the thrust of the movie is based on a real event that not a lot of us remember or are that aware of, and obviously we should be more aware of. Can you talk about the actual events that it is based on? What's the actual history that spawned this fictional version?
Absolutely. From my own personal history, my parents are from Taiwan. I'm actually born and raised in the States. But when I was growing up, my parents told my sister and I to always call ourselves Taiwanese and not Chinese. And that got them into some trouble. They were spied upon by other students from Taiwan, and they were basically put on a blacklist. They couldn't go back to Taiwan for a number of years. And when they did go back to Taiwan, they were harassed. People followed them around. And frankly, they got lucky because they had friends who had much worse things happen to them, and up to and including murder. There had been a series of murders of Taiwanese intellectuals in the late 70s and early 80s. And I knew that this mostly from my parents and their friends. And I studied it myself when I went to college and beyond. I actually ended up working in politics for about 10 years. So I had known quite a bit about this subject for a while, and I always thought, gosh, this is really interesting. I think most Americans have, like you said, not a clue about all this stuff that actually happened. This did eventually not just lead to harassment and following, but like I said, led all the way up to murder. And so I researched the actual murders that happened at this time in the late 70s and early 80s. And we basically stitched together all the a composite of all these stories. The film takes place in 1983, but really the events took place between 1979 and 1985. That's and we pick 83 kind of as a midpoint. But we try to shock the viewer back into that realm. You immediately see Reagan, you immediately see Cold War, you immediately see all these things that and for some of our younger viewers, they were just born at that time, so they barely even know these things. But definitely for kind of people who were like yourself, born in the 50s and 60s, we're hoping to remain them of what it was like and what the storyline was at that time, which was, like you said, Chinese communists bad, Chiang Kai-shek nationalists good, and what that meant and how that played out.
Now, there are a couple of things I want to talk about. One is this clash between the native Taiwanese that are in the United States. I mean, so they're all both immigrants. Were there clashes of people like at your age? Were there nationalist Chinese and Taiwanese, going after each other? Were there competing clubs on campus? I mean, because that basically went under the radar when I was there.
You are absolutely correct. That primarily took place in this time period, in the 70s and 80s. One of the reasons my parents were blacklisted was because they joined the Taiwanese Student Association at Kansas State University. That association got a letter from the Taiwanese government saying you cannot create your own club. You have to join the Chinese Student Association.
Wow.
And they wouldn't do it. And so a number of those people were blacklisted, had their passports taken away, their families were harassed back in Taiwan just for basically calling themselves Taiwanese, which is, I think, a very foreign idea for most Americans. The idea that I think most Americans just assume, well, you can call yourself whatever you want. You can call yourself Martian. We don't care. But from a Chinese perspective, the idea of identity is really it's very emotional for them. You know, they feel that places like Taiwan, Tibet, and a number of the other areas that they've kind of coalesced into what is quote unquote known as China, that's been taken away from them. It's part of their greatness as a nation. And so why wouldn't you want to be Chinese?
Yeah.
You know, there's a little bit of that. And I think it's important because it's important for Americans to understand, because out of all the issues of potential conflict between the U.S. and China, I mean, there's human rights, there's Tibet, there's currency, there's trade. But the only one that could lead to potential military conflict between the U.S. and China is the issue of Taiwan. There are over 1,500 missiles pointed at Taiwan right now. If Taiwan declares independence, and the fact is Taiwan is independent. I mean, it's got its own government, its own military, its own currency, its own culture. But constitutionally, it doesn't call itself independent.
Yeah.
And if it ever did, basically China has said we will use those missiles. Now, the United States is obligated by something called the Taiwan Relations Act, which was something Congress created when Carter officially broke off relations with Taipei and recognized the People's Republic of China, the mainland. And but in that piece of legislation, it says that the United States will help defend Taiwan if it ever comes under attack. What does that mean? That means who else is going to attack Taiwan? There's no one else.
Yeah.
So really, it is the singular potential military flashpoint. It was highlighted about a month ago when President Obama approved a $6.4 billion arms sale to Taiwan. When that happened, the Chinese government broke off military relations.
Yes.
They threatened to boycott American companies that gave arms to Taiwan. So it's very, very prescient. And I think something Americans really, like you said, probably don't know a lot about.
Yeah.
And so we hope that the film at least starts that conversation.